Hey guys, I am Ibigandscary. I'm bringing you another StarCraft 2 replay, this time featuring in our bottom left-hand side NoN's forsakNXE, our Masters level red Terran, and his opponent in the bottom right is going to be LuN3vu, HeLt, or it could be HeLt. We'll go with HeLt. Whenever they capitalize different letters like that, it makes it difficult for me to read it out loud, just because I'm not sure if I'm supposed to do this as two different words. It could be He-Man, who got a promotion and is now like He-Lieutenant, or it could be HeLt, and I like HeLt. I'm going to go with HeLt. I do like HeLt, though. He is a Masters level Terran himself. It's very high Masters for both players, something like top 20. And we're on the new Newkirk precinct. I don't know how familiar you are with it. The Xel'Naga Watchtower has been removed, and they added on all this extra land underneath it, making it so you have 3 avenues to choose from rather than 2 that had to walk by a Xel'Naga Watchtower that totally showed you everything. The thirds or fourths or whatever order you want to get them, these down here now have destructible debris and have 2 different pathways just because this land got added. They could throw in that new one. They also made it so that there's a lot more space underneath and around the bases, making it so drop play didn't have to squirm by. If you were going to try to hit the main from the left side, you'd have to kind of skirt by the mineral line or the bottom aspects of the main base, and really opening yourself up to a huge avenue where missile turrets could be a bit of a bother. Early gas coming out of HeLt, very early gas, to the point where I believe, not the earliest of gases, this is probably going to be a factory opening out of him, and then we don't have any gas coming out of Forsaken just for the time being. Probably going to be seeing a CC more than anything else. An early expansion of some kind. I love it whenever people do this. Throw down the supply depot to make it so that there's absolutely no scouting possible. But I think HeLt is just going to be relying on the fact that his barracks is going to be up very, very soon. Going to have a Marine out to kill that SCV. And really, there's not a lot that tells Forsaken too much by getting in here. I mean, an early gas is an early gas. He can click on that refinery and see how much gas is there. It wasn't early to the point where we're going to see a Reaper coming out of it, just because a lot hasn't been mined from it, and obviously there's a Marine on the production tab. We know that, but we're not going to tell Forsaken. It's okay. So the Marine pops out. Oh wow, great timing there for the SCV, keeping it alive, making it so that it can scout down into the natural mineral line and see. You know, there's no CC yet. Nothing has been thrown down at all. Speaking of command center, Forsaken throws down his own, and with the supply depots on the high ground as well as the plucky Marine. Oh wow, it looks like that SCV does go down. So. All things coming up aces for Forsaken. He's got a command center up on the high ground. He's going to be moving that down. Still no gas. He's probably going to have to throw down a handful of other barracks. He's throwing down a handful of other barracks. Usually 3 is your norm. You get a one rack's command center and then another 2 so that you can get out the sheer volume of Marines necessary to repel any sort of tech play coming out. It's very handy to have those just in case there's a Banshee or more likely drops. HeLt factory is coming out. Hellbat drops are a bit of an issue if you're on pure Marines, but hopefully we're not going to be seeing that here. Maybe we will. I don't know. Hellion coming out of the factory starport is going up right on top of it, but we don't see any add-ons being added to the barracks, so it is a peculiar 1-1-1 play. Without any add-ons at all, it's probably going to be some sort of Hellbat or just pure Marine timing. I would have usually, whenever I see this sort of build, it's Widow Mines coming out of that, and a Widow Mine drop from the starport, because nothing gets add-ons. You produce 2 Widow Mines, and the Widow Mines immediately jump into the starport and use it off of a handful of Marines. It's very cool. It's very low gas, which is why he's only on 1 gas right now. And it's a very nice timing attack. It definitely flows very, very tightly, but for some reason mines just don't do as much damage against Terran as any other race, it seems. It's just it's not as effective, and Hellions are definitely coming back into vogue just because it's pretty easy to micro them away from Hellbats, which seems to be something that Terrans like to rely upon right now just because they're very, very powerful. Stim coming up for Forsaken. He's got double gas back at home. Just a single tech lab, but throwing on a reactor. Probably going to be throwing on another tech lab or maybe another reactor on that. Barracks moving down his orbital. I wonder why he's positioning the barracks away from that. Can only imagine he's going to be getting... I have absolutely no idea, though. Maybe just to ease up on the micro. Good for the bunker being up on the high ground, repelling these guys, but that's okay because the medevac is now out on the field. Here we go. This is the medevac. Should be a second one, or oh no, that's right. He didn't get a reactor, so no, there is just the one medevac. He's moving down with just the one Hellion. That's weird. He's leaving the second Hellion behind. Oh, the Hellion took quite a lot of damage from that initial poke with the bunker, meaning that it is probably better for him just to move in with the two Marines. But that's going to shut down a little bit of the damage potential from this drop. The Hellions are definitely to be preferred over the Marines, even though they take up a little bit extra space. Moving down with quite a lot of Marines of his own, Forsaken's going to be repelling this with minimal losses to his mineral line. Only 7 or 8 workers killed. Ultimately, I think that was worth it. Definitely worth it for HeLt, but you know, it was shut down pretty quickly. That's what I'm talking about, getting up those unupgraded Marines. It's very handy to have those barracks, even though, you know, the stem wasn't even finished. The combat shield hasn't even been started yet. I do like the addition of the second reactor. That's an instantaneous benefit. It's sometimes helpful to get a second tech lab and get started on the combat shields. Pretty much right behind the stem, so that they both finish right at the same time. But I think Forsaken's playing this a little bit more relaxed. He's sitting back. He's probably thinking about getting a third. He's playing this for the long game. He's not going to be trying for some sort of super hard timing attack. He does have an engineering bay on the way, but it's just the one. Probably going to get started on +1. He'll need a little bit more than to break down what HeLt has going for him. He's got his own natural is morphing into the orbital command, but Forsaken's taking a little bit of an early economic lead, getting that third gas back at home, 31/29. Even despite the economic damage that HeLt has done, I feel like HeLt is a little bit behind Forsaken just because of that early expansion. Moving out with a second drop, this time fully loaded with Hellions. Oh no, the Marines totally... Oh no, totally shutting down that drop. Wow. Great positioning of the Marines on both sides, and good scouting from HeLt. I mean, he came in there and he saw exactly what was going on, but at the cost of a fully loaded 400 minerals Hellions, as well as the medevac. That is just absolutely brutal. He would have loved to have boosted that into the mineral line, but he saw these guys swung north right into the welcoming arms of these guys. That is brutal. What's back at home? Just the bunker to see what's going on here, and that was kind of ballsy, because if HeLt had decided to do a Hellion run by, he could have just skirted right by that bunker only at half power and had an entire mineral line for him to deal with. But those Marines, it looks like, were waiting for the medevacs to pop out of that factory, or that starport, which was doing the switch with the factory to use the reactor there. And this is going to be a double medevac drop, which I think HeLt is aware of. I mean, he saw that infrastructure taking place and switching up. He saw how many Marines were there. He's produced his own missile turret, but nothing else is hanging out in the main base. It looks like everything is down by the mineral line, which is ultimately going to give Forsaken a lot of time to pick apart this mineral line. Here comes the drop. He's not dropping any of his Marines. Oh no, one of the medevacs goes down, only dropping 3 of its Marines. The other one, it looks like they're going to target down the missile turret first, so it does survive. However, the Viking shows up to finish it off. I think there's plenty of Marines here, especially with STEM. They're going to be able to micro away from this. No, instead he chooses to sacrifice them to take down the Raven, which is a pretty cool play. I mean, Ravens can be definitely troublesome later on. You don't want to get that number up to the critical mass, but I would have liked to have kept them alive and kind of sprinted them up to scout out exactly what's going on in the main base. What exactly does Forsaken know about the main base right here? He's got a pretty good idea about the infrastructure. He can assume with the command center that this one is actually being produced in the same place as the other one. So he knows that there's a natural up there. He knows that he's not very far ahead, economically speaking. And he didn't do that too much damage with that initial drop, actually not succeeding in taking out a single worker. So he does need to do something just to justify the expenditures he's already expended in his aggression. 6 more Marines dropping down in a little bit more of a defensive position this time, well aware of the missile turret's probability and stemming them from the distance. Good micro here from Forsaken, keeping them alive, succeeding in taking out, I think, 2 SCVs this time, 5 workers killed total. And wow, hot pickup. Hellions arriving just in the nick of time, but this time Forsaken keeping them alive, swinging north side just to check out the infrastructure, seeing this huge tech play that is coming out from HeLt. So Forsaken knows now that he's dealing with a mech play if the Hellion plethora of Hellions hadn't cued him in on that fact. And look at this tech play. This is absolutely massive. We can see all 4 gases have been tapped for HeLt. He's got a 3rd CC, but he's not feeling confident enough just yet to push out, which I think, honestly, he's got a ground force that is impressive enough that he could probably afford to take that 3rd. Obviously, drops are a threat, but with the Vikings coming out, HeLt is really going to be able to lock down the air. Good positioning of the missile turrets. He's not going to have to worry about anything coming down into his main in anytime soon. Siege tanks are now out on the field, or at least being produced. A Hellion run by into the third, but all the Marines and Marauders pushing forward, really neither player wanting to stop and exchange blows, wanting to get right on top of them. Forsake kind of holds back with the damage just for a second, and I think none of the Hellions went down, or if they did, it was only one or two. Another drop coming in from the south side, but with so many missile turrets and the Vikings prepared for that drop, I don't think Forsaken's going to do too much damage. Speaking of damage, this time both players turning around and actually exchanging blows, and the Marine Marauder mix coming out definitely ahead. We can see the +1 Marines as well, fully upgraded with their combat shields. Yes, indeed, that missile turret pushes in, succeeds in dropping off a single one of the Marines, but the SCVs and the landed Vikings have no problem cleaning that up. Forsaken scouting out the third and probably checking up to the fourth as well. But again, HeLt just feeling kind of cramped. He's feeling kind of defensive. He hasn't pushed out and taken that third, and Forsaken has. Forsaken being kind of ballsy. He's probably gotten an economic edge, 57 over 49. Yes, absolutely. And he's equalized that worker's kill tab just because of the success of the drop. Both players have had two different drops, one of which was successful, one of which was really not successful. But that's okay because it equalizes. And I like equalizes just because that means it's going to be a long game. Oh, this death machine right here just kind of patrolling around, waiting and hoping that they're going to find a command center that's unguarded. I think Forsaken's surprised that HeLt hasn't decided to take out that third just yet. I mean, this is an impressive army. There's absolutely no reason for him not to take it, and I think he agrees. He is moving out with that orbital command. Pushing forward, though, Forsaken's going to be walking into that siege tank line. I like the positioning of the Widow Mines back at home. However, that does mean that if they do decide to discharge, they could damage the siege tank. So maybe just a little bit far forward, or maybe a little bit far north, because with his Hellbat's position on the south side, I would expect those Widow Mines to be positioning somewhere else. Pushing forward with the big stem, Forsaken melts away all the Hellbats, but again, the siege tanks now, the Hellbats had bought enough time for the siege tanks to get sieged, and with that, Forsaken's forces just beated back. The air superiority afforded by the Vikings has succeeded in taking out completely all of the medevacs, and a Banshee is just going to be raining down fire on top of Forsaken siege tank lines, and this is just a holding pattern right now for Forsaken. Eventually all of his siege tanks are going to get cleaned up to the point where the rest of HeLt's force can push in and push back Forsaken all the way back home, but every second he's standing here, he's denying that third, and HeLt is probably thinking about moving up to the top right hand side. The last of the siege tanks going to go down in just a couple of hits, but no, the Marines arriving just in the nick of time to push back that Banshee. 35 hit points, but 1, 2, oh no, the Banshee goes down with just a single siege tank left. But in all honesty, I think HeLt can just push forward and maybe even just land his Vikings on top of it just to crush it down. But I don't know. It's a hard point. I mean, siege tanks are a pretty tough nut to crack. Here comes the push from Forsaken, pushing forward with his Hellbats. This is probably going to be it for Forsaken's main force, but HeLt finally succeeding in taking his third, a third that has been held by Forsaken for quite a long time. 2-2 on the way, as well as +2 weapons for HeLt. Nice little force back at home for Forsaken. He's probably not going to have to worry too much about counter-aggression. Even though HeLt succeeded in taking and keeping every single one of his siege tanks alive during that force, I think he lost like 1 or 2 of them, he hasn't kept his meat shield alive. He's only got 3 Hellbats back at home. He's producing them 3 or 4 at a time, but without that meat shield, his siege tanks really can't be aggressive. He can only be defensive, and we've seen that HeLt is very passive. Big stem up on the unguarded siege tanks on the north side, and because of the scan, he can pick off the Widow Mine that's there. However, in order to get to those siege tanks, he had to walk through the huge siege tank line on the south side, and that just obliterated Forsaken's army. This is absolutely brutal. I mean, we saw that huge force go to absolutely nothing really fast, and you can just see the units lost tab heavily favoring HeLt right now. Even though he's just now getting up to 30, he's being incredibly cost-effective with his siege tank by being passive, and that's the power of mech, is that you can afford to be passive. You can afford to just wait around and get up this massive siege tank army, siege tank line, and eventually get up to Thor's, and then just kind of steamroll your opponent. And Forsaken's playing this correctly too. He's constantly battering down that siege tank line, trying to get 1 or 2 siege tank kills with his more expendable Marines and Marauders, and he's also keeping the Hellbat army in check, totally in check. Here comes the push. The siege tanks were not sieged, however, just enough Hellbats are there to draw fire. 1 or 2 of the siege tanks do go down, but HeLt is forced to siege well out of range of the infrastructure. Now pushing forward once again, but the siege tanks from Forsaken are just in range. Again, HeLt having to siege range, outside of infrastructure range. He wants to get to the point where he's shelling down damage on that orbital. The Vikings providing high ground cover. There's just a handful of Marines in this mix, but they don't want to get in range of the siege tanks from HeLt. Wow, HeLt using the brand new infrastructure, the brand new what's this called? Map. He's allowing his siege tanks to get up on the high ground, beginning to shell down the refinery, and eventually kind of leapfrogging forward to the point where he can shell down damage on the orbital and maybe even the mineral line. Forsaken does not have the tanks necessary to kind of keep HeLt in check. He can't have his siege tanks positioned to the point where he could throw them down, and I love this positioning from HeLt. He's more worried about a attack along the point of that siege tank line. You can see that HeLt has his siege tank line in kind of a vertical aspect, and so that means the weakest point is the two tips. So if there was going to be a stem and a run in, it would be from the north side or maybe the south side would be the most effective one, and because the Hellbats are positioned there, he is kind of shutting down the most powerful avenue of attack for Forsaken. So Forsaken's kind of in a hard place right now. It looks like he's got a drop moving on to the north side, which will hopefully draw a little bit of attention away, but HeLt now has a meat shield powerful enough that he wants to come in, sacrificing all those Hellbats so that he can reposition his siege tanks just now within range of that orbital, melting away all the siege tanks from Forsaken and now doing some damage again to the factory. Those Vikings having no problem cleaning up every single one of the medevacs in the air. It looks like that orbital is going to have to lift off, but the run by is coming in, dropping off well out of range, within range of that sensor tower though, and yes, there goes the pullback. Oh, handful of siege tanks are left alive. It looks like the orbital has to lift off. How many workers killed? 23 workers killed for HeLt, still just the 8 for Forsaken, so he didn't succeed in taking out any of the workers in that area, but he has shut down this fourth right now, and 61 over 52, so not a huge difference in the harvesters on the ground, but you can see that the mineral income is severely lacking now that HeLt has lost his fourth. His main is probably pretty much mined out. This is going to get totally cleaned up, but speaking of cleaned up, it looks like the siege tank line has completely withdrew. That's proper English. Withdrew. Yeah, the siege tanks had to go all the way back home, and they're so very, very slow. That's got to be incredibly frustrating for HeLt because he had this stranglehold on the third for Forsaken. That's really got to be frustrating. I love the positioning of the siege tanks behind here. It's going to be able to shell down damage on the mineral field, and I don't think Forsaken is aware that they exist. Now Forsaken is taking the fight, a field 176 over 162 supply, but HeLt is really crippling the bio army from Forsaken by keeping the medevac numbers down to such a reasonable number. I think this is an unreasonable amount of Vikings right now, to be honest. I would love these to half of these to be Banshees, just because he can rain down fire on those siege tanks lines, and without the siege tanks, this bio army from Forsaken is going to be absolutely nothing. A single Marine is going to be pecking away at that orbital command, but without the destructible debris is going to be taken care of. There's really nothing that orbital can do. The Marine and Marauder strike force moving off to the right side, but remember there is a sensor tower that has been constructed here. A big push in from Forsaken, but neither player is really going to be coming out ahead, just making it so the siege tanks can position a little bit more aggressively. But with so many siege tanks, HeLt really doesn't have to worry too much for Forsaken. I mean, all he can do is throw armies away. But again, Forsaken poking in at that third, this time succeeding in taking down a handful of those SCVs, and he's not elicited any response from HeLt's main force just yet. It looks like HeLt is okay with sacking that base entirely. Maybe he's thinking about expanding right here because those siege tanks are so very, very slow. It would be incredibly close to the siege tank line. It wouldn't be that difficult to defend. Landing the orbital this time well within range of those Marines and Marauders. It looks like that orbital is going to go completely down. Oh my goodness, that is brutal. Wow, the siege tanks pushing down to the bottom right-hand side to take out the destructible debris. It looks like this is the new location that HeLt has elected for his base. Speaking of, I was speaking of base, I was going to go check out the infrastructure, but Forsaken's not giving me the chance. He's pushing forward. It's cleaning up the remaining vestige of that previous siege tank line, and now the siege tank numbers are really beginning to fall. 12 over 19. Forsaken's definitely equalizing that with 25 Marauders. Wow, that is such a resilient strike force, and that's a cool play because he doesn't have the medevacs necessary to keep his Marines alive with this constant splash damage from the siege tanks, and the medevacs are constantly being picked off. He's switching more over to the Marauders, making it so that they can do some extra damage to those siege tanks, maybe bust the siege tank line given the opportunity. And they also do extra damage to all those structures. You can see how easily they melt away those orbital commands when he's doing that strike force. I like that. However, the lack of anti-air is really going to be hurting him. Oh, big stim from Forsaken pushing in, but the siege tank line, HeLt, really playing this with perfection. Seeing that Forsaken was moving in that area, he's going to have all of his siege tanks sieged on the high ground. Forsaken escapes with the majority of his bio force, but man, we saw 12 over 16, now 24 over 8. Oh, that is brutal. That is brutal. Where are those siege tanks? Back at home, making a kind of a hard point right by one of the main gateways into it. The third is mining strong. Main's pretty much mined out for HeLt. It looks like he's finally landing his orbital command in the bottom left-hand side, taking that fourth, as well as another fourth over here. Oh, here comes the push. The siege tanks were not sieged. However, the Hellbats were there to protect them just while they were getting into position. Speaking of position, the siege tanks from Forsaken coming in on the left side, but again, HeLt with just a massive siege tank line is having no problem at all keeping Forsaken in check. But it's just in check. Forsaken has a far more mobile force. He can stem these Marauders and be on the other side of the map before those siege tanks unsiege. And that is so brutal, because normally you would need a medevac to lift off and be doing these drops, but Forsaken, because he doesn't have the medevacs, he's just using the fact that his Marines can run really fast to kind of spread HeLt thin. And HeLt is having to sacrifice whole quarters of his ground force. Oh no! So many siege tanks. So many siege tanks. Forsaken gets in there, snipes a siege tank, snipes a Hellbat, and just retreats, but still loses a nice, healthy chunk of his force. These guys are well within range of that sensor tower, and the siege tanks are there up on the high ground. A good stim from Forsaken. He was worried about the siege tanks being up on the high ground, and that's a wise play because he would have lost every single one of those units. I wish there was a break in the action just for a second so that I could look away and point out how many bases Forsaken has. The economy is absolutely booming for him, 67 over 45, but look at that mineral income from HeLt. He's got so many different orbitals, not having to morph them over to planetaries, and I honestly don't even know. Here comes the strike from on that point that I was talking about for Forsaken, moving in on the north side of that siege tank line, sniping out several of those siege tanks. We can see that the sheer number of siege tanks has definitely fallen in this central area for HeLt, only down to 6 right now. Equal number on the left side for Forsaken, and his infrastructure is allowing him to get back the Marine and Marauders. Eventually he's going to break this siege tank line. End of story is that he's up to 6 bases or something. Actually, are they? No, he's up by 1. Forsaken is up by just a single base right now. It's this one right here. Even though HeLt has the this base, he hasn't succeeded in taking the one into the top right-hand side. Both players' economies are just absolutely massive. They're spending their money really, really well. Bit of a gas bank right now for HeLt, but that's okay because he's definitely going to be more gas-heavy than Forsaken just because he's mech. Wow. Oh, thank you for the break. I needed it. So many siege tanks, so many Vikings, but we can see that he's beginning to mix in those Banshees, just a single one, a second one coming in, and that's really going to be raining down fire on those siege tanks. The Marines really need to get in there and pick off those Banshees, but in order to do that, yes, they walk just within range of that siege tank line. So very, very brutal. I love the play from HeLt, getting up these sensor towers. It is totally an investment. Oh, those Marines coming in, picking off one of those Banshees. The other one is very weak right now. It would be worth it just to stem these Marines, suicide them in to take out that Banshee, because the siege tanks are far more important than the life of those mere Marines. Okay, 2 Banshees once again coming in, and I think eventually this is just going to get totally cleaned up. He's building missile turrets on the back, expecting him to retreat to the point where he can draw those siege tanks into this bit more of a narrow choke, maybe misuse that. I mean, in all honesty, as far as HeLt gets a field, the easier it is for Forsaken to do a bit of a run by. No Hellbats here at all. Those Marauders pushing forward, really dealing heavy numbers to those siege tanks, heavy losses to the siege tanks, pretty much cleaning up that entire siege tank line. However, the macro from HeLt is just so brutally strong, continually churning out siege tanks, continually moving in, but without the Hellbats to support them, those siege tanks are beginning to melt away. This is what I was talking about with those Marauders, really just closing the distance by running very, very fast. A really clutch play from Forsaken because he was getting slowly beaten back into his own base. I love these cheeky siege tanks. That is so great. But can they even scout that mineral line? Yeah, they can see maybe if one was working there. I wonder how many they've killed over time. 28. Brutal. That is brutal. Oh man, this game is brutal. So many siege tanks from both players, so many different expansions, but they're slowly beginning to mine themselves out. The naturals are now totally done. The third is looking kind of sparse for Forsaken. A bit of a skirmish here, but that's okay. The Hellbats being pretty ballsy, pushing forward, but with the sheer number of Marines and Marauders has been cut down to the point where I think HeLt is beginning to be a little bit more aggressive. But 145 over 108, what has happened to HeLt? His economy is beginning to slip. He lost a massive number of siege tanks, down to 14 right now, and 9 for Forsaken. And Forsaken only has like 2 factories, I think, churning them out. Just 1? No, 2. Yes, 2 factories churning out those siege tanks. And then if we had a second, we'd look at HeLt. So we're going to look at HeLt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different factories, 2 of which have reactors. So 5 siege tanks at a time is what HeLt is capable of producing right now. He's only doing 1 because he's pouring more money into his airplay. He's getting out Ravens, he's getting out Banshees, which is a great play. He has such a strong stance over them. Where are those Vikings? Did he lose a buttload of Vikings? How many Vikings? 4. Wow, I wonder what happened to those Vikings. Well, he must have landed them to save his siege tanks lines, and those Marauders can definitely chew them apart pretty quickly. Or he just sacrificed them to clean up supply, but I can't imagine him doing that because he was down to only 100 supply in a short time. Forsaken once again showing off how flexible his Marauders can be, but they're flexible because they stem, and you can look at those healthy chunk of health has been taken from those Marauders just because of that stem, which really gave him nothing. He got in the area of that base, making it so that he can kind of clean it up. It looks like a siege tank has succeeded in forcing the liftoff in the bottom side. Oh, and forcing the repositioning of the main force, and Forsaken pushing in and cleaning up that orbital command. It looks like every single one of these guys are going to get cleaned up, but at the cost of an expansion for HeLt, which is a huge loss, an absolutely huge loss. He's got a significant bank right now. He's got a significant siege tank line. He needs to produce more of a meat shield, and that's what he's not doing. He's not making any Hellbats right now. Okay, fine, 2 Hellbats, great. I'm glad you're listening, HeLt. He needs more of that, though. He really desperately needs to have a meat shield to keep his siege tanks alive, because given half an opportunity, Forsaken has proven that he's going to stem and just suicide in his Marauders and totally clean up a huge chunk of the siege tank line from HeLt. These Marauders are just looking for the opportunity to bust down those debris and move in, but again, with the scan, Forsaken seeing that the siege tanks were up on the high ground. Really neat positioning here, making it so that he can cover this little avenue that's rarely used, but I like it. It's clever. He's going to be able to scout if there is going to be a poke in, but with the sensor towers, HeLt knows exactly where Forsaken is going, and it's just keeping tabs on this massive Marauder force. He might be worried that there's a small little strike force waiting in the wings, because that has been something that Forsaken's doing. And finally, we're seeing more Hellbats being added into the mix. We've got 3 here. We've got 3 more on the production tab. Probably a couple more moving up. The Vikings have slowly been reproduced, and now we have plenty of Banshees thrown in here. Oh no, the one avenue that's not covered by a sensor tower is being used by Forsaken, pushing in immediate destruction of that command center. Oh, and he is forgoing the expansion on the south side of this by pushing in, and is going to be dealing damage to the infrastructure. And because these factories and starports are here, these siege tanks are going to have a hard time getting within range of these Marauders. They're sieging up, but these Marauders can swing down to the south side and stay alive. Oh, pulling back, taking massive blows from that siege tank line. All of the siege tanks, oh wow, huge number of siege tanks, actually more significant than I initially anticipated. The Marauders are basically having free reign, being able to swing right. Is he going to push up into the natural? No, it looks like he's turning around, going to be dealing some damage to the unsieged siege tanks pushing in. This is absolutely brutal. Oh my goodness, both players totally trading armies, but heavily in the favor of Forsaken. He's pushed in, crippled an entire I don't even know, man. Okay, so he took out this base, made it so it wasn't mining. He canceled a command center, took out an orbital, took out 2 factories, 2 starports, all at the cost of his enormous army. However, he also did a healthy amount of damage to the siege tank line of HeLt. He's down to 9 siege tanks, which is just an unheard of number for him. His air fleet is still very much commanding of the sky. He's got a lot of Banshees. He's got some really nice potential of some harassment from those Ravens, going to be able to throw down the turrets or maybe even some Hunter-Seeker missiles on top of them. But now we can see more Marines are being added in, and because the siege tank line's not nearly as impressive as it has been, those Marines stay alive for a lot longer than you would expect. It's going to be able to do a lot of anti-air damage. One of the Banshees goes down. There goes a Hunter-Seeker missile on the siege tank line, only succeeding in taking down one, and HeLt has been completely repelled. He's going to be feeling so incredibly frustrated right now. He's been in command this entire time of the pacing of all these strikes. He's been able to dictate where everyone's army is going to be because of his massive siege tank line, and then just due to the hyper mobility of those Marauders swinging down into this new cavernous expansion and swinging up into the third. Remember, this is something that just didn't exist until that new the new map came out, and man, that's absolutely brutal. Again, the Hellbats go down, the Marines and Marauders pushing forward, but with some point defense drones left over, I believe, from the previous fight. Yeah, they're about to expire. The Marauders really aren't very effective at taking down those siege tanks. The Banshees really have to be careful. I love the production of those Marines, making it so that we're 7 Marines now with 5 Marauders on the production tab. Forsaken is sitting pretty, but both players are beginning to get mined out. I think both of these expansions are pretty low on minerals. The third is completely mined out, and the only mineral patches left here are the ones that haven't been bombarded by the siege tanks. So Forsaken has got to start making something happen, because even though HeLt hasn't been exchanging to the best of his potentials, he is definitely more effective on the resources loss side of things. Those siege tanks are always going to be more effective than throwing away bio armies, all things considered. And because of that, I think HeLt has more mineral lines left untapped on his side. So the longer this match goes on, the more in favor that's going to be of HeLt. But 184 over 112, he's really just kind of goading Forsaken in. Here comes the Unsiege and the Stem. Those Marauders pushing forward, having no problem at all crushing the initial aspects of that siege tank line. But 2 more siege tanks, just immediately melting away from the push for Forsaken. I think this is going to be it. There's really nothing left from HeLt. Good game, well played. Great game. Great game. Oh my goodness, he's got a lot of minerals left over. I wonder if he had just an extra factory, if those 2 factories hadn't gone down from that initial push and they were producing Hellbats, how that would have played out, because that unsiege and push would have been met with stiff resistance, and it would not have been nearly as cost effective as it actually was for Forsaken. I mean, 177 supply left over from that push, 58, 57, I round up. That was an awesome game. That was absolutely brutal. I liked a lot of it. I like you guys too. So if you have a game you want me to cast, you could PM me here or on Reddit. One way or another, I will see you guys later. I'm actually, one more thing. I can't overstate how impressive it is that the medevacs weren't used for drops. I mean, the main benefit that you have in a drop play like this with bio and siege and tank is the threat in the back of the mind of the meching player that he has to deal with drops, and it's completely thwarted by these sensor towers, by the sheer number of Vikings that were out on the field just constantly killing these medevacs, and those are high tier units that make your Marine and Marauders a lot more threatening, not only giving them extra health, but also with their boost, getting you into mineral lines, crushing that economy. HeLt totally locked that down, and Forsaken was like, that's fine, I don't need the linchpin of my army, I don't need it. I can just stem my Marines and kind of skirt around where I know your sensor towers are, and then just dart into your main base, cripple an orbital, and then get out. Or just throw away that army because mine guys are expendable. That is just so cool. I never would have done that. I would have lost this game like no one else's business. Alright guys, this time for real. I'll see you later. Bye.